All right, welcome everyone. Thank you guys for coming. I see a lot of people I've never seen before, which is great. I heard a few of you heard from social media, TikTok, Instagram, so that's great that we're getting the word out there. My name is Cameron. I'm the president of the Clay County Young Democrats. We have a few people here, like Diana. She leads the podcast, and I am going to inform you guys after the meeting, we are going to have Dayna on a podcast. So we're gonna have a link maybe in a few days, a week. We'll post it on our social media when the podcast is ready, but just stay tuned because she's also, if you have a friend who isn't here and she wants to, they want to hear the answers to all their questions, it will be on the podcast. Um, I was like thinking of a meeting agenda. So I also just wanted to really emphasize that the deadline to register to vote for the primaries is July 20th. So you have 11 days. Um, that doesn't mean you can't vote in the general, but unfortunately, because Florida is a closed primary state, if you're not registered with a major party, whether it's Democrat or Republican, you're going to be shut out from most of the races on the primary. So everything besides judicial races and school board races, you're not going to have on your ballot. So um, if you like what you hear from Dayna and you're registered as NPA, independent, anything that's not registered as a Democrat, uh, I would, you know, politely ask that maybe you switch your registration today. I can do that for you to Democrat, just because we are about to reach the voter registration deadline. Um, and I know not everyone wants to be registered with a major party because they don't fully align with either side. But the fact of the matter is that unfortunately we just live in a closed primary state. I would prefer to live in an open primary state, but we don't. And I don't align fully with our Democratic leadership. I'm not a big fan of Schumer or Jeffries. That's besides the point. But the whole point is just that you have more voting power if you register with a major party. So if you would like to have a greater say in who represents you, I think it would just be a better idea to change your registration to Democrats before July 20th. And I can do that today. And if you have any friends who are registered, maybe NPA independent, you should tell them the same thing because they might go to the primaries thinking they can vote. They can't vote in the vast majority of the races. Um, so yeah, that was a big thing. Um, hmm. We're gonna, so yeah, that was kind of my introduction. I'm a president. Diana does a podcast. We also have Pat. She helps with a lot of the Young Democrats. We have Pat back there. Jackie, she's the chair of just the Clay County DEC. And then we have our treasurer, Chris. And then Britt Robinson, she's one of our candidates for Congress for District 4. You can meet her after this. But yeah, that's pretty much my introduction. So now we're about to let Dayna Marie Foster introduce herself, kind of lay out her vision for Florida. And then after that, we're going to go into maybe about 20, 30 minutes. We can take it by ear, but of Q&As. And then after that, we can have more time to chat and you can meet Dayna. But right now, we're going to go into introduction. She can give her vision, and then we're going to do a Q&A. So, yeah. Oh,
Hi, everyone. How's everybody doing? Awesome. So, my name is Dayna Marie Foster, and I'm running to become the next governor of our home. Thank you. Thank you so much. I was actually I forget what her name is, but I was telling someone earlier, I was like, well, my hotel is actually in Nassau County, and I did not make sure to have it in Clay County, so I do apologize. But nonetheless, I'm really excited to be here. There's just something about the vibe of, I think, just Jacksonville and the Jacksonville metro area. It's a different kind of aura, as my students would say, that y'all have up here. And so I'm really excited to be able to take the time out to really learn about your towns, your cities, and just, as I always say, hearing stories of hope, of struggle, of triumph, and just what you all want to see out of your next leader of this entire state. So I do believe that good leadership is one that listens and then it responds appropriately. Um, I know we've had stuff all over social media, and you probably already have a general idea about my background and why I'm stepping into this race. So I won't expand too much on that, but just for those who might not know anything about myself, I've been a public servant since I was 19 years old. I started within the public library system in Broward County at the African American Research Library and Cultural Center in Sistrunk, which is a historical Black community. It's one of the key areas that's kind of under the spotlight, so to speak, of what's happening in District 20 with the congressional race out there and the representation issue. So we'll leave it there. Um, Go Elijah, though. Yeah. And so during my time working in public libraries, it gave me a unique perspective to be able to see public policy as an end result, right? And so within the library where I worked, we were a public good, we were a resource to the community, whether it was through offering digital literacy classes, help for filing your taxes, starting a small business, right? Even getting into homework help for students and ACT and SAT prep, resources for our veterans after they, would come back home and giving them access to internet through hotspots and a lot of different things, right? And then from there, I stepped into public education, which is an area that is heavily under attack, not just by Republicans here in the state, but also the presidential administration. And what I can say is having this unique experience and professional experience within public service is that I'm coming from two areas that are currently being attacked and defunded because these are the two key areas that facilitate knowledge and also preserve knowledge and information. And we all know that a powerful populace is one that is informed. And that's why they're coming for these two areas so deeply and so hard. So within public education, I've also been able to see how most people think being a teacher is just you go in the classroom, you teach the kids some stuff, you have your lunch breaks, and then you leave, and then you get to enjoy the summer vacation of like 2.5 months. And it's really not just as simple, right? I'm not just an educator, right? There's a social aspect that goes into it. There's an advocacy aspect that goes into it as well. What we're seeing is that public education is under attack through, for example, book bans, right? You walk into a media center, even at the school where I work, and the shelves are empty, right? And these book bans are coming about and they're being challenged, the books on our shelves, because a lot of the books are representing or providing representation for students primarily through the LGBTQIA community, right? And offering identity and things of that nature. But as I candidly said at a community forum in Homestead, they are trying so hard to bring about this anti-woke agenda, and I rather be woke than asleep. I rather be cultured, I rather be informed of the world around me, and there are many people across this entire state who do as well. So going back to 2024, and after the presidential and election took place, and we saw that we had Donald Trump yet again as president, right? Those first, not even 100 days, but the first 30 days were so taxing and draining, and it was stressful because every day you turn on the news and you'd see something else. But then, in addition to that, you were seeing within our state legislature the implementation of Project 2025 in real time. And so it caused me to look to our state to see, okay, well, who's running for governor and who's also running in my districts? And so I saw one of the key areas where someone was being challenged as an incumbent was Moskowitz versus Larkin. Again, love Larkin as well. Um, but then I looked towards the governor's race, and the only person that I saw was David Jolly. And so I did my research. And as a constituent, I was not comfortable with the fact that he was a former Republican turned Democrat, literally just a couple of months before he filed his paperwork. And to see that within the last just only shy of 10 years, right? His time in Congress, he voted and pushed for legislation that completely goes against our ideals and our values as Democrats. And so I actually waited. I didn't just say overnight, oh, I'm going to run to become the next governor of this state. No, I waited to see who all from our Democratic leadership within our state was going to step up to the call of action and to challenge this individual and to give us the representation that we deserve as a party. And no one did. Later on down the line, Jerry did, but then he had to drop out due to unfortunate circumstances, and my thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. But before that, no one did. So I did what we as a populace always do. Whenever our government does not show up for us, we take the power of democracy back in our hands and we show up for ourselves. And so I went to look and see how this process goes of being able to file to run for governor. And even that was a very difficult process, right? And it just showed me how there's a lot of reformation that even needs to take place within our elections process as well, because democracy is representative. We are supposed to see leaders that are like us in some way, shape, or form, whether it is age, whether it is gender, whether it's racial background, whether it's socioeconomic, it does not matter. You're supposed to see some type of representation. And when I look towards our leadership for the state of Florida, I don't see representation for Dayna Marie Foster at all whatsoever. So, with that being said, filed my paperwork, and then I did the research to find what are the 6 key areas where we need most immediate relief, right? Some of it is very intuitive, right? And then a couple, it was like, okay, let's do a little bit more digging. So our campaign is strategically curated to have what we call 6 key policy pillars. And in a way, I always say that it's my promise to Florida that within the first 4 years of my administration, we will either see progress within these areas or we'll see total reformation. And I'm very aware that for a Democratic governor stepping into that Republican legislature, things are going to be a challenge, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's just simply going to be a challenge. And I'm up for the challenge and I'm up for that fight. So, the first thing that we want to do is make sure that we're establishing economic opportunity within our state, right? When we look at our small business owners across the entire state, they are the backbones of our economy, right? Florida is very tourism driven. And right now we have legislation in place that makes Florida, well, unwelcoming. And so, for example, referencing back to the LGBTQIA plus community, we have legislation in place where it has been deemed that Florida is unsafe for people of that community. So, of course, why would they come and visit Florida, right? They're not going to put their lives in jeopardy. There are also other things that are in place in terms of our legislation where morally and ethically people across the entire country have just put a red X over Florida and say, yeah, no, thank you, right? And that is affecting our budget. So, what we want to do is make sure on one side we are actually implementing the reformation and overturning some of these laws, which again will take time. But then, from an economic standpoint and through the budget, what we want to do is make sure that we're allocating funds for what we call micro grants. So instead of giving out loans, because it just seems like the government always wants us to be in some type of debt, and we're continuously going to be in this process of never ending paying for debt, right? We want to make sure that we are able to facilitate and give out micro grants to our small business owners. We also want to make sure that we are primarily investing within clean energy jobs, which kind of ties into our concern for the environment. So even though the environment isn't its own policy pillar, so to speak, within our campaign, a lot of what we want to implement are what we call legislation that is environmentally conscious. And so when we are investing within clean energy jobs, what we're doing is that we're preserving our future for the next generations to come, right? Because we have to make sure that we understand, and also Republicans too, climate change is real, right? And so we need to make sure that we are stimulating the economy, but also reinvesting within ourselves with these clean energy jobs so that we can ensure that we are protecting our water supply, our air quality, and also our land ultimately as well. Because when you think about it, right, we're human beings. We have to be able to breathe in oxygen. If we don't have at least any trees, well, how is that oxygen going to actually be created, right? And I'm no science teacher, but I do know that much, right? So, with economic opportunity, we also want to address the affordability crisis, which is a huge thing, right? It's plaguing everyone, and it really actually doesn't even matter if you're at the top of the food chain or if you're at the bottom. The affordability crisis is affecting everyone, right? So it just affects us in different ways. And I had a former volunteer on team who had said one time that we are all closer to becoming homeless than we are to becoming billionaires. For some of us, it might happen in 5 minutes. For others, it might happen in 5 years. But no one is guaranteed to be a billionaire at, the drop of a dime, so to speak. So when it comes to affordability, we wanted to take a lot of time to really make sure that it was ironclad. And so on one end, we want to address the affordability crisis primarily through housing. And so with housing, we want to make sure that we are addressing it through a renter standpoint and then home ownership as well. So as it relates to renters, what we want to do is make sure that we are primarily building mid-rises and high-rises in transit hub areas. Transit hub areas always usually have the zoning for affordable housing, so we're not stepping on the toes for environmental concerns. And then in addition, they are considered walkable neighborhoods. So if you have if you are living in affordable housing, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that you do or you don't have access to a car. You can't make that assumption. But what we can do is make sure that you have the resources around you in your community so that you're not left vulnerable or in a disadvantaged state. Then we also want to make sure that for home ownership, we are utilizing public land. And there's this habit of Republicans that all of our public assets within our government are always handed over to the private sector. And I can't tell you why. Well, of course, we know why, right? It has to do with something green. But nonetheless, these are our resources, right? Because our tax dollars go to this. Why would we just sell it off, right? And it kind of makes you even think back to when Rick Scott was governor and he privatized the Bright Line, and now the Bright Line is going out of business when before it used to be a public asset. So it's things like that. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our public land and utilizing it. And the way that we are able to provide relief to affordability is that if we partner with community land trusts, right, we're going to be able to build homes on public land. It makes the homes significantly cheaper, and it also gives homeowners an opportunity to save, right? And so as they're saving, what they're able to do is save to be able to purchase the home and the land elsewhere so that they're having total home ownership. And what we're doing is creating that bridge to what we call generational wealth. Because you have too many families where they either A, don't have a home and they're renting for the entire duration of raising their young family and their young kids, or B, which leads me to my next topic, is that property taxes are so expensive that they're not able to keep a family home within the family. So with the property tax issue, what I will say is this. I don't want to say that I don't have an answer for you all, but what I will say is that I'm in, what do they call it? The lab cooking. So, and what I mean by that is we are researching and making sure that the proposal that we have is something that can tangibly be done. And so, what I can tell you is this: we are looking at creating a progressive homeowners tax system. And what that means is that we would be taxing for property tax on the basis of the value of your home, but also keeping your income into consideration. It's very similar to the tax system that California has for income tax, but we're not doing income tax. We're trying to apply their system to property tax. So we have a little bit of forecasting that's going on, a little bit more research, but once it's fully ironed out, then that will be published on our website as well. So after I kind of looked at the economic issues and the affordability issues, and we also came up with some of these policy proposals, then we started looking into other areas as well. And so one thing that makes absolutely no sense is that, and I believe it was Bernie Sanders who said it, is our country is like one of the only countries that doesn't have a universal healthcare system. And it makes no sense that in 2026, healthcare for all is not something that has been established. Now, here in Florida, always say all the time that as governor, I intend on expanding Florida Medicaid. And so we're actually in our campaign getting ready to start to push out that advertising or that social media content to make sure that the ballot initiative that's being petitioned right now to hopefully get on our general ballots in November actually goes through for the expansion of Florida Medicaid. Because should Florida elect me to be its next governor, well, it kind of A, aligns with our policy, but also B, it makes my job just a little bit more easier to just have to sign an amendment into law instead of having to go back and forth with Republicans, which I'm not afraid to do, but you know, work smarter, not harder, right? So, in addition to that, as it relates to our healthcare and making sure that we're establishing establishing it as a right for all. We want to make sure that we're investing through the budget in resources like preventative care, making sure that we are bringing more competition in the state as it relates to insurance so that we're lowering down the premiums that are being paid, right? Also to tackling those prescription costs as well. And of course, through the necessary state agencies, because as governor, I'm able to give the priorities for specific legislative sessions. Then also, one of our next pillars is gun reformation. And I believe that's probably more of a hot topic when you're here in North Florida and even Central Florida, a little bit in maybe Southwest Florida for sure. And I come from Broward County. I heard someone from Broward County as well too was here as well. And one of the biggest tragedies that we have seen recently in the last several years is what took place at Marjory Stoneman Douglas, right? And those families will never be able to get their children back or their loved ones back. But even despite something like that happening on our home turf, Tallahassee still has not made the meaningful reformation as it relates to gun reform. And at Foster for Florida, we're not trying to take away anyone's Second Amendment rights. What we are trying to do is make sure that we are keeping our communities safe, that our kids are able to stay and lead long lives and be able to experience all the things that they should instead of it being terminated short and early. So one key piece of legislation that I will hopefully get passed through the legislature is what we call a safe storage law. And so a safe storage law requires for any gun owner that has minors in the home or individuals that have been deemed as red flags by the court system that they have to make sure that they keep their firearm under lock and key in a safe. No exceptions, right? Because again, we have to practice precautionary measures of safety. Of course, we want to make sure that we're implementing universal background checks, that we're strengthening our red flag laws, right? And just ultimately changing that narrative for gun owners to know that, again, we are not coming for your rights. We are just trying to protect human lives. That is it. Our next pillar that we have is also related to immigration, right, and immigrants' rights. Oh, there's a spider. I was like talking and I was like, I hope I'm not like seeing things because it's been, a day. But no, I'm seeing correctly. It is.
I'll be the brave one.
Okay.
It's right here.
Right here.
You. Where'd it go? Did I get it?
We'll let it live.
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, at least we know my eyesight's good. So, all right. So, as it relates to immigration, I've seen that our social media really irritates Republicans when I say that no one is illegal on stolen land and that we need to make sure that we're treating one another with more of a higher regard as it relates to humanity, right? And when we look at what's happening, whether it's the ruling with TPS or what's even happening overseas in the middle as it relates to between Palestine and Israel, there's this lack of humanity, right? And we need to make sure that we are putting humanity on the highest of pedestals. And with that being said, what we want to ensure is that we're providing opportunities for our immigrants to create pathways for them to achieve citizenship, right? Now, we're not saying we're making immigrant citizens because legally we can't do that as a state, right? That is a federal responsibility. However, though, as a state, what we can do is help create those pathways, like I mentioned. So, for example, making sure that immigrants are able to get a Florida state issued ID, right? Because again, you want to make sure that you have those identification, and then you're able, for example, to put like a bill in your name, or maybe even get a library card, right? Making sure that our students have access to education, or our immigrants communities have access to healthcare. There's all these things that are starting to take place to X out our immigrant communities. And what doesn't make any sense to me is not to sound any type of way. Our immigrant population, they do the jobs that, well, the rest of us don't want to do. And they are giving back and aiding to our economy. So, as the young people would say, make it make sense, because it's really not making sense to me. So, they always say on the Republican side of this dismantling of DEI. And what we have to understand is that our diversity is what makes us stronger. But in order to fully embrace our diversity, we have to have equitable and inclusive public policy. It's just as simple as that. And so, with that being said, as I get into our last pillar, which is education, which of course is very near and dear to me, being an educator. But like I mentioned before, Republicans, especially here in Florida, are coming for public education hard. And this upcoming school year, we are seeing the facilitation of Project 2025 in real time through what they call the FACT program. It's an opportunity to provide what they call factually accurate information to students and giving them an alternative to advanced placement courses. So for some reason, they have a FACT college algebra class. Couldn't tell you what you learn in algebra except for math and maybe a couple letters thrown in there for word problems. And I'm the math teacher, right? But then they have the FACT US history class. And so this is to combat the equitable history, the inclusive history of what has transpired in this country, and not trying to, as my mother would say, put lipstick on a pig, right? What they're trying to do is change the narrative of the history of this country, and it is what it is, right? And in order for you to grow and move forward in anything in life, you have to acknowledge your past, you have to acknowledge your shortcomings, and then you grow from it. So what we want to do is make sure that through the Department of Education, and I've said this very openly, on day one of my top 3 priorities is to suspend and remove the board members of the DOE that voted to adopt the Phoenix Declaration, because that's how we're able to have the FACT program be implemented this upcoming school year. Then we also want to make sure that we are investing in public education, fully funding it. And I used to say fix it, but that was a poor choice of words. And so lately, if some people might have noticed that I don't say fix and fully fund, I say protect and fully fund public education, because that's where we are right now. And so through that, what we want to do is make sure that we're allocating the necessary funds to increase teacher pay. And so over the course of the 4 years, what we want to do is make sure that we are increasing teacher pay so that base pay for a teacher, 0 years experience with a bachelor's degree, they're making anywhere between $60,000 and $65,000 a year. And so it'll be tiered. It will be tiered so that veteran teachers that have the doctoral degree, that have the 20, 25 years of experience, are making the 6 figures that they deserve. Because we have veteran teachers where, not to sound any type of way, I make more than them. And that's not okay. So with that, we also want to make sure that we have universal school lunches. We also want to make sure that we establish an independent curriculum commission so that we can have an entity that can oversee the curriculum being taught in the state to make sure that we're not indoctrinating our students. Again, making sure that we're promoting that equity and that inclusion and promoting the diversity that has happened over the course of our history. Of course, removing these anonymous book bans, right, so that we can actually have books on the shelves for our kids to read, and just making sure that, again, we're protecting public education, because our public schools are resources for our communities, especially our rural communities as well. So a lot of times people always say, okay, well, Dayna, how are you going to fund all of this, right? And so what we want to do is look towards some of the areas within our policy pillars to see, okay, how can we close some of these loopholes? So first and foremost, as it relates to housing, for example, we want to close some of these loopholes as it relates to tax breaks for those that are wealthy. Also making sure that we're taxing the luxury non-resident properties, like so individuals that come and they have a residence and it's not their primary residence, right? We also want to make sure that we're increasing the corporate tax rate as well. Even if we increase it by 1 to 2 percentage points, that's an added $1 to $2 billion to our state budget. And so again, because I'm coming with this mathematical background, I have 2 degrees in finance, so I understand the state budget to the T. It's about making sure that we are being fiscally responsible. And so that's kind of maybe a Republican term, but nonetheless, we still have to be responsible with our budget, right? But we also have to make sure that we're increasing it some as well, because we do have one of the more smaller budgets out of all the states in the entire country. So with all that being said, right, my my proposal, my agenda, my vision, right, it's truly rooted in what we need as a people. And I always say that I'm the candidate that the people have built, because what I'm proposing, it's coming from the stories that I have heard and the research that I have done, and it's reflecting the voices of we the people. And right now we have a legislature in Tallahassee that is not passing legislation that matches our voices. And so, as Cameron mentioned, please make sure that you are registered to vote by July 20th. Please, if you are willing to, register as a Democrat so you can participate in our primary. And make sure that you are informing everyone that's around you, right? Because we all have our networks. And if we tell someone who tells someone who tells someone who tells someone, right? Then we're able to, as we call, spread the blue flame. And I entered this race to ensure that we had an option other than what the establishment wanted us to vote for. That we had an option that is rooted in our values as a community and as a state. This is our home. This is our democracy. And so now it's time for us to take it back. Thank you. Okay.
We're about to move into the Q&A now. We'll probably go until about 7:15, so about 20 minutes, maybe 25. Question, asking Dana questions and answering. I know it's hot in here, so if you guys need water, you guys can get water right now before we move into it. We also have a bathroom through that door in the back, like if you go to the left, so if you need to use the bathroom. But are you gonna be walking around with it? Okay. Dayna will be walking around with a little Trump microphone thing.
Oh my.
So for about the next
I think you have to get that on camera.
Okay. Gotta come around. It's on. It's on now. It's got the blue light. All right, we're good.
How you doing? I'm Justin Roberts. I live actually in Duval County, but I'm
Okay.
close by.
Thank
I'm
you for
from
coming.
Virginia, but military brought me here.
Okay.
Yeah. So my question is, coming to the governor's role
Mhm.
relative to dealing with the federal government.
Mhm.
I know they have a tendency to be a little bit vindictive when they don't get the coordination that they would desire from the governors. Let's say federal funding for education or any of the initiatives that you would like. Let's say you are successful here getting something passed, but then they're going to hold some funding over your head. What is your plan for dealing with the federal government for at least the next 2 years?
So as I mentioned before, and thank you for your question, that's why I'm looking as much as I can to see what can we do at the state level to ensure that we're investing within ourselves, and how can we create our own source and our own stream of revenue for our state budget. So everything that I have projected does not actually include the federal government at all whatsoever. It's more of local funding. Now, of course, if we get the federal funding, that's great. But if they don't want to look out for us, then that's fine. Because if Washington, D.C. won't look out for us, then we'll look out for ourselves. Thank you for your question.
Yes. All right.
Hi there, Justine Galbraith here from Clay. So one of the things that you mentioned was public education, and
Yeah.
one of the big problems we see here in the state is the dismantling of our unions here, which also tie into driving the wages for the rest of the state, people who are in the non-union jobs. How are you going to approach working with the unions, but also kind of bringing us back to stronger unions and
Right.
a stronger workforce?
Right. So one thing is to ensure that, and I've said this in other like town halls and events is making sure that I have a good working relationship with the AG, right? Some of the change that we need to actually see implemented is not something that I can do as the governor unilaterally. Unlike our president, I will follow the law. And so with that being said, it's working with the AG to make sure that we're overturning some of these laws, right? So when we look at Senate Bill 1296, we're seeing in real time in my backyard out in Dade County, how something was not able to pass through the union down there because they didn't meet the threshold, right? And for me being a public educator, being a due paying member to the Broward Teachers Union while I was still within public education, my union fought for me and the rest of the teachers within the Broward County Public School District. So, it's a shame that we have to have unions because our government will not do right by us. But if we, again, have one of our own in office, then we'll be able to have a more balanced and equitable situation as it relates to the legislation and the laws that we have in place. So I intend on dismantling a lot of things, but of course, making sure that I'm following the law, not operating unilaterally, and also having that good, positive relationship with the AG, with the Democrats in the state House and the Senate, and then also working with Republicans as well. And, I'm going to have to get a little crafty there, but, hey, my mama raised a fighter, so I'm all here for it. Yes.
Next.
It's
Hello,
accurate
can y'all hear me?
representation.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Lindsay. One question I do have is, as a nursing student, I'm concerned about the healthcare workforce shortage.
Mhm.
What will you do to recruit and retain more nurses and other healthcare professionals?
So, it's actually a good question. I don't get asked questions about nurses very often, but what I will say is this. Nurses, just like teachers, we are truly undervalued, and y'all are also very, very overworked as well. I know we have teaching shortages as well. As it relates to healthcare, what we will ensure is that after kind of our priorities that we have that we want to implement, it's about having an assessment of all of our state agencies and working with local government the best way that we can, right? So one thing is that as governor, my role is more of a guiding role. And I believe deeply within home rule. So I'm not going to step on anyone's toes, but at the same time, maintaining a certain standard is absolutely something that we will implement. So what I will say is this, it's not that nurses don't matter, they absolutely do. It's more of, I would say, a priority within the entire 4-year term that I would have, as opposed to maybe those first 100 days, because it's also the same thing with our veterans as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. One other question.
Yeah,
One
of
other
course.
question. Sorry, y'all. What steps would you take to improve access to mental health care for both adults and children across Florida?
So one aspect of our healthcare pillar is having more of like those e-visits be more readily accessible. With that, it ties actually into infrastructure and making sure that in rural communities we have, well, basically internet and reliable internet as well. So it's a lot of investing in certain key areas to make sure that we're able to provide these resources. And it brings me back to the state budget, making sure that we're passing the legislation to increase the corporate tax rate and also close those loopholes, have that added revenue, and then we can invest it appropriately. And so that's what we intend on doing.
You? I suppose.
Ooh, the president's question.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I think there's nothing is going to be as transformative, especially for the younger generation over the next decade or probably our lifetimes than AI. Um, and I have seen AI has actually become a really big issue within the Republican race. You have people who are even left-leaning who are considering someone who is like borderline Nazi, a Groyper, James Fishback, just because he has a comprehensive AI plan and just because he wants to protect our our wildlife, our what we have. And I think it's just troubling that we have people who would usually be more on the left side of the spectrum are considering someone who has said such horrible things about Black people and immigrants
Yeah.
and all these different communities just because they don't feel like the left has really uh I don't know, like pushed as hard as they should on this issue. So I would just say, do you have an AI plan? Specifically, for example, in Clay County,
Hmm.
our commission just about 2 weeks ago voted for a 1 year moratorium on data centers.
Yeah.
I spoke at the commissioner meeting. It was a 4-1 decision, but it's one thing that I see both Republicans, because my family's Republican, and Democrats unite on is they want AI regulation and they don't want a data center in their backyard.
Right.
Um, so and also maybe just a little recommendation, like I know we still have a little bit over a month, but maybe getting that on your page because
Hmm.
I know a lot of Republicans and Democrats who don't have their mind made up yet would consider voting for someone with a very comprehensive like AI
Yeah.
plan.
So what I will say as it relates to like the data centers and
Yeah.
even like the incinerators, it's not something that I support. And the reason why is because I am very conscious about the environment. And so I've said in certain interviews that there's a delicate balance that we have to have with creating affordable housing supply, but also still preserving our environment, right? So, as it relates to the regulation of it all, that is something that we are currently still developing. And so that's why we haven't necessarily made a public stance on it just as of yet. What I can say is I don't support it, right? Because they're going to have increased energy costs. It's going to eat up our water supply. It's coming for our land, right? And again, it brings us back to our environmental concerns. So I can tell you that bit, but in terms of like an actual proposal for what would regulation look like, that's still in the works, but we will have something posted very soon.
Okay, Keith. Yes. We got like a few. Okay, we're gonna do him. We'll give Annie, Will, and then someone else.
It's like when I'm teaching. I'm like, wait, hold on, wait.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Hi.
Hi. Something that's kind of taken up a lot of my attention and focus is kind of the militarization
Mhm.
of police, and now, like you was just talking about with AI, data
Yeah.
centers, and flock cameras.
Mhm.
All of this seems like infrastructure for kind of a techno-fascism almost.
Yeah.
They're gonna come at you with like donation money in order to cost the taxpayer, probably millions of dollars
Mhm.
in, privacy and actual tax money to build their stuff. I
Mhm.
mean, I know this is kind of a broad question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, one thing is I can't be bought. So that's one thing. And that's why, our funds look very, very much so different than David Jolly. And we are strictly grassroots in that sense. What I will say, my thoughts on the over militarization of our police departments is not something that I agree with. I'm very candid when I speak about police officers because their creed is to serve and protect, right? And the key word is to serve first. And so it kind of brings me back to just even the reason why I even stepped into this race, which was to have a redefining moment within Florida politics to remind public elected officials that they are supposed to be public servants. They are supposed to serve first. So I do think that there is much reformation that needs to take place. Again, I want to make sure that it's collaborative with local government. And so with like sheriff departments for each of the counties, and then of course, local government for the different municipalities. Um, but we do have to see a change because again, they're supposed to be serving us and we shouldn't be afraid of our police officers because that's not the creed, that's not the oath that they took.
Yeah.
So, and they also need to be reminded of that,
Thank you, ma'am.
of course. Hi.
I just want to say thank you so much for coming here. We're
Thank
pretty
you.
lucky to have you down here talking to
Aw.
us, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have maybe a left field question, but
Okay.
back in 2024, DeSantis signed into being HB 1645, which essentially revolves around language. What
Mhm.
sorts of language and words are we allowed to say and write and have in legislation? And I
Yeah.
think language I think you would all agree, is incredibly important.
Mhm.
So, what happens when the word climate change, for instance, is
Mhm.
taken out of, our ability to converse and talk about things?
Yeah.
And so, I guess my question is like, what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that maybe you would prioritize along with your climate initiative?
Oh yeah. I mean, like to be like not in candidate mode, but just like as Dana for like 2 seconds, it's so irritating and it's really annoying that like these are the things that they're so hung up on, you know?
Mm.
Like climate change is real, but this is what we're spending our time on in a legislative session is to say that climate change doesn't exist
Mhm.
instead of actually having pathways, you know, and providing bridges to make sure that our everyday working people have the resources that they need so that we're not in this space of survival, but that we can actually like breathe, right? Because it's hard with inflation and being able to keep up with like different costs and stuff like that. So, to answer your question more directly, I think I mentioned this to someone else's question. I have every intention for a lot of things to make sure that I'm working with the AG to make sure that we're overturning some of these things. There's a lot of reformation. Like it's not just the climate change like thing that we want to bring back as it relates to language, even with pronouns with our students in education, when we're talking about like bathroom bans and gender affirming care, that's stuff that, you know, we want to have reformation with as well. 1296, like we want to like overturn that. There's a lot. Even the rent control ban that's through Live Local Act, which has been in effect for like decades, where local government can't even put a like rent cap because of the statewide ban. So there's just a lot of things that need to be changed. But climate change is real.
Mhm.
I'll say it 3 times: climate change, climate change, climate change. So, and then someone's gonna post this, and then the Republicans are gonna be like, "Oh my God." So,
All right.
thank you for your question.
Again, thank you for being here. We are the book ban capital of the country. I don't know if people know. Clay County has the most banned books in our school of anywhere in the
Yay.
country, so that's exciting. So I'm glad we have a real Democrat we can vote for in this primary. My question
Thank
is
you.
really around Israel.
Okay.
Florida is one of the states where it is against Florida's law to use any government funds for a company that has decided they want to boycott, divest, or support sanctions against Israel.
Mhm.
We have also, on the same token, mandated that like we will use our like funds for like employee retirement to invest in like fossil fuels, right? Doesn't make any sense. I'm hoping these are policies that you would dismantle. I mean,
Mhm.
preventing people from being able to have an opinion on the state of Israel,
Yeah.
or banning our own tax dollars from being spent in places that align with our general population is
Yeah.
anti-American. It's
Yeah.
anti-free speech. But yeah, that's my question.
Whenever I think about just that topic in general, it always makes me think about like other things that Republicans will put into place and say, like, it's just not equitable, if that makes sense, right? So they get upset when we say things that they can't say, and then they try to put limitations on us in terms of like what we can say. Like at the end of the day, if we're going to have freedom of speech, we're going to have freedom of speech. Like you can't make it conditional. So I don't align with those policies. Again, just making sure that I'm working through the proper channels to make sure that we have reformation. But I will make sure that I will always operate in efforts to ensure that we are maintaining our freedom of speech because that is our American right.
All right. Who has? Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Hi, my name is Alex, Duval, or currently living in Duval, at least.
Okay.
Um,
I was told I have to do the Duval. I was like, oh God.
so my question is, I know it was already mentioned AI. I am a part-time robotics instructor. I
Mhm.
also teach coding, graphic design, web
Yeah.
development, all that. Um, my thing is that I feel like I understand the not so good stuff of AI. I hate the AI slop that I see online on and all that. But I also do teach part of programming for AI. So I do feel like that is an important part, especially of our future when it comes to the workforce and everything. I feel like it will be an important part. So I know you said you were against like all the AI data centers and everything,
Mm.
but EVs are also very good for our environment,
Mhm.
but they also do take up a lot of land as well. The infrastructure for charging stations, we also have
Mhm.
solar panel fields and all that, right? That also does take up a lot of our land. Um, AI is also going to do the same thing, but it's also the important part of it. So how can you balance both trying to regulate AI, because I do
Mhm.
support regulation, but also not completely wiping it off the face of Florida and, you know, putting us behind, because I feel like
Mhm.
that's what something that would happen as well.
I can understand your take from, I would say, a business standpoint, right? Um, because not to sound any type of way, but at least on the Republican side, they always talk about Florida becoming like a technological like hub so that we can have that type of economic economic like stimulation within our economy here. Um, while I would say that I definitely respect what you're saying, um, for me, I'm Florida first all the way. And I am just not comfortable with having AI data centers and incinerators across our entire state when we currently have like a water supply shortage. Like we have other states that take our like water supply, like, and that's something that's like not even widely discussed. So I think before we even look at having AI data centers just in Florida, there's just a lot that we've got to clean up in our house first, and just making sure that we're putting us first. You know, I'm not going to say that, oh, yeah, at some point we're definitely going to have them. And I'm not going to say that we're not. I don't know where the future will go. I don't know what other leaders might come, into office, whether it's me or somebody else. Um, but I just feel like we need to just finally put Florida first. We have to make sure we're putting our environment first as well and not on the back burner. And once we kind of deal with that, then we can kind of look at just regulating and maybe having not necessarily the data centers, but maybe something else as it relates to the technological sector.
Nice. Any more? You have one more? And then you said you have. All right. Who has one? Sir? Did you have a question?
I'll say mine today. You're fine. Still ask more. Wait, we can do it. Okay, well, mine is pretty simple.
Okay.
Oh wait, here, take this because it's on the live stream.
My name is Jermaine Noble. I'm also a veteran. Served in the U.S. Navy.
Thank you for your
One of the
service.
biggest things that I'm seeing across the country, and I see Angie Nixon has, you all have a stand in here for her,
Yeah.
is redistricting.
Mhm.
That is a huge thing. The federal government has basically pushed it back down to the states to basically redistrict.
Mhm.
And not to be a Debbie Downer or anything like that. That's not what I've come to do.
Yeah.
I want to see you, in the governor's house,
Mhm.
God's will. Redistricting. How are you, um, being that it has been pushed down to the states,
Mhm.
how are you going to address redistricting? Because redistricting is huge
Yeah.
as it relates to, and I'm just going to throw a number out here. I went in about a month ago and we have 86 plus thousand registered Republicans to like maybe 40,000
Mhm.
Democrats, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of that is based upon Clay County
Mhm.
constantly growing
Mhm.
and moving,
Yeah.
right? So how do you um, keep, redistricting honest? Because
Mhm.
as you can see, Clay County will probably never go blue based upon how it's district. And
Mhm.
that's my question. Thank you.
Okay. So, What I will say is that the redistricting that took place was illegal. It was. And the only reason why that it stuck is because the Supreme Court justice's decision. That is the only reason why. So as governor, I would never do anything that is illegal. But at the same time, I don't think that Republicans realize that once honest like redistricting actually takes place, well, you know what? Actually, they do realize because this is exactly why we're in the position that we're in. Florida is more progressive than others give us credit for, you know? So everything will balance out. Again, I think a lot of what people would like to see through the governor's office is not necessarily an action of the governor. So when we talk about like kind of combating against the redistricting and how it's illegal, that's again something that I do want to work with the AG on. There's like an entire list. And I think if JJR wins and as well as myself, he's probably like, oh my God, I'm so sick and tired of this woman. But, you know, there's just a lot that has to like be done to kind of overturn what has taken place. And I do believe that it is worth making sure that we do step foot in that fight as it relates to redistricting and putting back our lines to where the way that they were drawn before this decision actually came out this summer. Because, you know, it's representation, right? It's accurate representation. It's our democracy. Our elected officials are supposed to represent us in some way, shape, or form, like I mentioned before. So that's my take on it. What happened was illegal, and it's only standing because the Supreme Court has gone rogue. But that's going to be up to our congressional elected officials. One time for Brit in the back to make sure that they do what they need to do so that we can have Supreme Court reformation. Yeah.
Maybe one more. You're
I-
Oh, wait. We'll give everyone a chance.
All right, no pressure because it's the last question. Uh, it might be, naive of me to say it this way, but it definitely feels that more than before,
Mhm.
there is a lot more pressure to undo a lot
Mhm.
before we can build more. Not saying that we shouldn't also build,
Mhm.
but how do you plan to balance that? How do you clear old airways while giving us new paths
Mhm.
forward? Because there's
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, book bans, there's women's health, there's
Yeah.
LGBTQ rights that a lot are very immediate to a lot of people, even if
Mhm.
they don't feel general to the kind of like progress of a city. If I'm not
Yeah.
phrasing that correct.
Yeah.
But so how do you plan to balance that?
Right. So, one thing I always ask for when I talk to constituents is letting them know that I will need grace and patience, right? But in addition to that, there are three main things that I've always said that I would do the moment I step into office. So, one of them I did mention, which is like the education of removing those board members, but also making sure that over state agencies, we terminate 287G agreements so that we do not correct. So that we're not working with or for ICE. Like our, you know, police officers can get back to serving and protecting, and then working with the Democratic AG, making sure that we're going through with local government to let them know what is mandated federally and what is optional. Because Uthmeyer bullied municipalities into their 287G agreements, you know? I mean, look at what happened down in Key West. They were like, yeah, no, we're not signing it. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, yeah, no, we have to sign it because of Uthmeyer, you know? And even down through, you know, expanding Florida Medicaid and making sure that I'm taking whatever power I do have and maximizing on it in the most strategic way possible to have that immediate relief, right? Um, the balance is going to ensure that we do have a timeline and a timetable. Some things might be a 30, a 60, a 90, or maybe a year-long thing. But one staple that will be very prevalent in my administration, probably than anyone else historically, is accountability and transparency. And so throughout this entire process, I will make sure to make myself as readily available as I can to the people. So even if it's something where it's like a semi-annual like town hall, you know, and two like key areas of the state, just to make sure that people can come out and ask their questions and again hold their elected officials accountable. Like me being here in this room, it's the most the biggest honor, it's a privilege, and it's a pleasure. And most elected officials and even candidates should feel the same way, because we are asking all of you to trust us with your everyday lives, so to speak, as it relates to the government, right? And so I don't take that lightly. And I will absolutely, like I said, make sure that I maintain that transparency and accountability should Florida elect me to be her next governor.
That's something else to say?
Yeah.
Um,
Do I close out?
Or close out?
Yeah, we can just close out.
Or take that. You can use
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
You need it to speak. You're gonna be in.
Okay, so
Come on, Cameron.
so like I said earlier, if you like what you heard here, and if you're registered NPA, independent, anything other than a Democrat, um, you won't be able to vote in the gubernatorial primary if you're not registered Democrats. So you won't see her on your ballot. So I would just recommend before you leave, I have a voter registration forms here. This is probably going to be your last chance before the deadline. So just come to me. If you don't know, I have access to Vote Builder, which is like the state voter rolls, so we can check. I can check for you. But that should be a priority. Also, this is actually aligned with our monthly meetings. So we have monthly meetings every second Thursday. So this is the second Thursday, July 9th. It's every second Thursday, 6 to 7:30 p.m. So our next monthly meeting will be in August, whatever day the second Thursday is, 6 to 7:30 p.m. We also have a community forum on August 4th, and then our gala with Maxwell Alejandro Frost is going to be September 10th, right? And you guys probably know who Maxwell Alejandro Frost is. He's one of our congressional representatives from Orlando. He was the first Gen Z rep. So there should be information here if you want to buy tickets. It will include food, drinks. Of course, you hear from him and all that. So that's pretty much it. We're gonna have some time where you can meet, take pictures, selfies with Dayna, and then we're gonna try to kind of wrap everything up so we can get her ready for the podcast. Yes. Yeah.
I just want to let you know, we do a lot of events too, just as the Young Dems. I'm with the Clay County Works, which is our office. And, oh, I'm sorry. In any case, I just want to let you know, we have a lot of events going on here. And we have a community calendar that we post up here that you can look at your leisure and let it decide if there's something you would like to do. And he said this, we do have a community forum coming up. We also have a gala. And I also want to let you know that this coming Monday at the Fleming Island Library, you can see the candidates for running for school board. So if you want to do that, you're welcome. This coming Monday on the 13th at 6 o'clock at Fleming Island High School. And that will be the candidates. And we were mentioned also that we have Leadership Blue, the Florida Democratic puts on. And this is where you can see candidates and learn more about the Democratic Party, learn things more in the background about canvassing, phone banking, the technology, and on that source. And they're going to have a gala there too. And that will be on Saturday, the 18th. And Pete Buttigieg is going to be their keynote speaker. So if you would like to attend that, there's still tickets available at $300 a piece, and it does include your meal. So if you want more details, feel free to let us know. Greatly appreciate it. And I'm glad everybody's here. And come back again and visit us.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to be here. If you don't follow us already, please follow us on Foster for Florida, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also, our website is fosterforflorida.com. We are always in need of donations, more volunteers. We're actually looking for a field captain for Duval County. So, but again, thank you so much, and keep up the good fight, and make sure that you just continue on this journey of making sure that we are taking back our democracy.